portal opened onto a world that looked like ours before people. Wide rivers, old mountains, a sky too clean. We saw no cities, no roads. Then the forest began to move. Branches tilted together like heads in prayer, and the roots under our boots curled into shapes that looked like letters. A wind passed through the leaves and spoke without a mouth, long, low sounds that matched our heartbeats. The bark split in thin smiles. On the nearest trunk, fresh rings formed fast, drawing our names in wood. The trees were not plants here, they were the city. That was 3 hours ago. Now I'm crouched behind what used to be Blake's body, trying not to look at what the forest did to his face. The satellite phone died the moment we stepped through. Our GPS spins in lazy circles, confused by stars that don't match any constellation I've memorized. I should explain how we got here, but my hands won't stop shaking. The trees keep whispering my name. Not just any name, but the one my mother called me before she died. The one I never told anyone at the Cascade Research Station. 2 weeks ago, we were just another government geology team mapping sinkholes in the Olympic Peninsula. Standard stuff, core samples, soil analysis, the kind of work that pays well but bores you to death. Blake Torino was our expedition leader, 20 years of fieldwork carved into his weathered face. Duncan Hawthorne handled our tech, a nervous kid from UC Berkeley who treated every piece of equipment like a religious artifact. Then there was me, soil specialist, former army, the guy they called when the ground didn't behave like it should. The anomaly appeared on our 3rd day out. We'd set up base camp near Lake Quinault, deep enough in the wilderness that cell towers were just a memory. Duncan's seismic readings picked it up first, a perfect sphere of absolutely nothing suspended 3 feet above a collapsed logging road. Not invisible. Nothing. Like someone had cut a hole in reality and forgot to fill it back in. Blake wanted to report it immediately. Protocol dictated immediate evacuation and federal notification for any unexplained phenomena. But Duncan convinced us to wait. "Just one day," he said, eyes bright with the kind of curiosity that gets people killed. "We document everything, take measurements, then we call it in. Think about the career boost." The sphere pulsed once as we approached, like a heartbeat made of light. Blake stepped forward, extending one weathered hand toward the edge. "Feels warm," he murmured, "like sunlight through glass." That's when the portal widened. That's when we saw the forest on the other side, ancient and untouched, and made the stupidest decision of our lives. We stepped through. Now Blake's dead, Duncan's missing, and the trees know things about me that I've never spoken aloud. The portal behind us has shrunk to the size of a dinner plate and getting smaller every hour. I need to find Duncan, I need to get us home, but first I need to understand what this place really is. The first thing I learned about this place is that blood doesn't clot properly here. Blake's wounds stayed wet, red pooling in patterns that reminded me of circuit boards. I'd seen enough battlefield injuries to know that wasn't normal, but I pushed the thought aside. Focus on Duncan. Find Duncan. Get out. I left Blake's body beside the shrinking portal and followed boot prints deeper into the forest. The trees watched me move, actually watched, their bark shifting to form crude eye shapes that tracked my progress. When I stopped, they stopped. When I changed direction, branches creaked overhead like old floorboards. "Duncan!" My voice echoed wrong here, bouncing back with extra syllables I hadn't spoken. The forest returned my call as Duncan can, like some twisted children's game. His trail led through a grove where the trees grew in perfect geometric patterns. Not random like earth forests, but arranged in mathematical spirals that hurt to follow with your eyes. Each trunk bore the same strange markings. Not quite writing, not quite art. Symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I found Duncan's backpack hanging from a low branch, 20 feet off the ground. No way he could have reached that height without climbing gear, but the bark showed no scrape marks, no disturbed moss. The pack simply hung there like a forgotten Christmas ornament. Inside, his equipment was still running. The tablet displayed seismic readings that made no sense. Wave patterns that suggested the entire forest was breathing. Inhale for 30 seconds, exhale for 30 more. The ground itself had a pulse. Fascinating, isn't it? I spun around, nearly dropping the tablet. Duncan stood behind me, perfectly clean despite our hours in the wilderness. His usual nervous energy had vanished, replaced by an unsettling calm. The Duncan I knew picked at his cuticles when he was thinking. This one held his hands perfectly still. "Jesus, you scared the hell out of me." I approached him slowly, watching for signs of injury. "Where have you been?" "Blake's dead, and the portal." "The portal is closing, yes. I've been watching it." Duncan's voice carried new harmonics, like he was speaking into a resonance chamber. "This place operates on different physics. Quantum mechanics become visible here, observable." He walked to the nearest tree and placed his palm against the bark. The wood rippled under his touch, forming shallow waves that spread outward like dropped stones in still water. "They've been trying to communicate with us since we arrived." The trees. They're not individual organisms. They're neural networks, a collective consciousness that spans continents. "Duncan, we need to leave, now. That portal won't stay open much longer." "But don't you see?" He turned to face me, and I noticed his pupils had dilated completely, black circles in green irises, like staring into deep wells. "This is the discovery of a lifetime. A parallel Earth where intelligence evolved along botanical lines instead of mammalian. The trees here developed consciousness, developed technology, developed civilization." I grabbed his arm, felt the muscle underneath his jacket, still human, still warm, but something about his skin felt different, rougher, with raised patches I couldn't identify through the fabric. "What happened to you out there?" "I learned things." Duncan pulled free from my grip with surprising strength. "This world diverged from ours approximately 65 million years ago. The asteroid that killed our dinosaurs never struck here. But more importantly, the meteor that brought the building blocks of human consciousness to Earth was intercepted." The trees around us began to lean inward, forming a loose circle. Not threatening, exactly, but deliberate, purposeful, like they were preparing for something. "The trees here aren't just intelligent," Duncan continued. "They're technological. Root systems that function as data networks, photosynthetic processes that generate computing power. They've been watching our Earth through quantum entanglement, waiting for us to develop the technology to open doorways between worlds." A sound escaped from somewhere deep in the forest, low, resonant, like whale songs played through church organs. Other trees began to respond, adding their voices to create harmonies that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my bones. "They know about us," Duncan whispered. "They know about our cities, our wars, our pollution. They've been preparing." The tablet in my hands beeped softly. New readings appeared on the screen, atmospheric composition shifting in real time. Oxygen levels climbing steadily while carbon dioxide plummeted. The forest wasn't just breathing, it was actively filtering the air around us. "Duncan, listen to me carefully. We're suffering from some kind of exposure here. Hallucinations, maybe oxygen toxicity. We need to get back to the portal while we still can." But when I looked up, Duncan was walking away, moving deeper into the geometric grove. The trees parted before him like curtains, revealing a path I hadn't noticed before. Root systems formed steps leading downward into earth that glowed with soft phosphorescent light. "They want to show us something," he called back without turning around. "Something important, something about why the portal opened now after all these years." The singing grew louder. More trees joined the chorus until the entire forest resonated with frequencies that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I had two choices: follow Duncan into whatever lay beneath this impossible forest, or return to the portal alone and hope it stayed open long enough for one person to escape. The tablet beeped again, seismic activity spiking. Something massive was moving underground, responding to the tree's song. Duncan disappeared down the glowing path. The trees began to close ranks behind him. I followed. The descent took us through living architecture. Root systems formed spiral staircases that adjusted their spacing to match our stride. Bioluminescent fungi provided perfect lighting, brightening as we approached and dimming behind us like motion sensors. The walls pulsed with capillary networks carrying nutrients or information in patterns that reminded me of subway maps. "Remarkable engineering," Duncan murmured, running his fingers along the organic corridors. Where he touched, the surfaces responded with ripples of color. No concrete, no steel, no environmental damage. Just symbiotic growth patterns optimized over millions of years. How the hell do you know all this? I kept my voice low, though the acoustics here carried every whisper. 3 hours ago, you couldn't identify poison oak. Duncan paused at a junction where 5 tunnels branched off in different directions. Each passage glowed with a distinct hue: amber, emerald, deep violet. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, like he was tasting the air. Left tunnel, he said with absolute certainty. The mycelial network is guiding us toward the central processing core. Duncan, you're starting to scare me. What the fuck happened to you up there? For the first time since I'd found him, uncertainty flickered across his face. I'm not entirely sure. When I first got separated from you and Blake, I panicked, ran blindly through the forest until I collapsed from exhaustion. That's when they found me. The caretakers. Mobile units of the collective consciousness. They look like... He struggled for words. Imagine if a person was grown instead of born. Flesh that resembles human anatomy but follows botanical logic. They helped me understand. We entered a vast underground chamber that made my chest tight with vertigo. The ceiling stretched up beyond the range of the bioluminescent lighting, supported by living pillars that breathed in slow, synchronized rhythms. In the center of the space, a massive root system formed something that looked disturbingly like a throne. Sitting in it was something that had once been human. The figure retained basic bipedal structure, but bark had begun replacing skin in patches across its torso. Branches extended from its shoulders like antlers, heavy with leaves that rustled without any wind. Its face was the worst part, still recognizably human features, but the eyes had been replaced by clusters of seeds that glowed with internal light. Dr. Catherine Walsh, the thing said, and its voice came from everywhere at once. University of Washington, disappeared during a botanical survey of the Olympic Peninsula in 1987. Duncan nodded respectfully. She was the first to find a portal. The collective has preserved her consciousness while adapting her biology for long-term survival here. Dr. Walsh, or whatever she'd become, turned those seed cluster eyes toward me. You are afraid. This is understandable. Your species was not designed for symbiosis. My species? The words came out sharper than I intended. Lady, I hate to break it to you, but we're all human here. Her laugh sounded like wind through autumn leaves. Human. Yes, that is what you call yourselves on your Earth. But do you know what that word means? Homo Sapiens. Wise man. A designation you gave yourselves after conquering every other intelligent species on your planet. She gestured to the walls around us, where new growths were forming complex geometric patterns. Here, wisdom took a different path. When the Great Dying came 65 million years ago, your ancestors' ancestors never developed the neural complexity that would eventually become human consciousness. Instead, intelligence emerged from root networks, from chemical communications between plants, from the slow, patient exchange of information across forest ecosystems. The patterns on the walls began to shift and flow, forming images. I saw vast cities made entirely of living wood, transportation networks of interconnected root systems, libraries stored in the genetic codes of ancient trees. Civilization without destruction, technology without pollution. We have watched your world through quantum resonance tunnels, Dr. Walsh continued. Observed your species' rapid development, your remarkable creativity, your devastating impact on your planet's biosphere. We opened the first portal in 1987 to study you more closely. To study us? Duncan leaned forward, his dilated eyes reflecting the chamber's ambient glow. Or to help us? Both. Neither. We discovered that human consciousness, while brief and chaotic by our standards, possesses a quality we lack: individual creativity, personal ambition, the ability to conceive of possibilities that do not yet exist. Her branch-like arms gestured to encompass the chamber. We grow, we adapt, we process information across vast networks, but we cannot imagine beyond our current state. What do you want from us? Integration. Your world is dying, poisoned by the very creativity that makes your species valuable. Ours thrives, but cannot evolve beyond its current limitations. Together, we could solve both problems. Duncan stepped closer to the throne. The portal isn't closing by accident, is it? You're controlling it. The aperture requires enormous energy to maintain. We can keep it open long enough for willing subjects to cross over permanently, but temporary visitors strain our resources. Dr. Walsh's seed cluster eyes fixed on me again. We offer transformation, not vacation. I backed toward the chamber entrance, but found the passage had sealed itself with a curtain of hanging roots. You're talking about turning us into that. Into you. Into something new. Something that combines the best aspects of both our evolutionary paths. She rose from the throne, moving with fluid grace that no human spine could manage. The process preserves consciousness while adapting biology for optimal survival in our ecosystem. Dr. Hawthorne has already begun the transition. I spun toward Duncan, finally noticing what I'd been trying to ignore. The rough patches under his jacket weren't skin irritation, they were bark. His fingernails had developed a greenish tint. When he smiled, I caught a glimpse of what looked like moss growing between his teeth. It doesn't hurt, he said, reading the horror on my face. Actually, it's incredible. I can feel the entire forest network, every tree, every fungal connection, millions of years of accumulated knowledge flowing through my thoughts. You're not human anymore. I'm becoming something better. Something that won't strip mine planets to death or wage wars over imaginary borders. Duncan extended his hand toward me, and I could see thin root systems threading through his palm like veins. They need people like us, scientists, specialists, individuals with unique perspectives. We could help them understand our world well enough to save it. Dr. Walsh moved closer, her branch arms reaching out with disturbing maternal affection. Your colleague expressed concerns about the timeline. How long your world has left before ecological collapse? We calculated approximately 47 years before mass extinction events become irreversible. So you're offering us a lifeboat? We are offering your species evolution. Her voice carried harmonics now, like multiple people speaking in perfect unison. Those who adapt will carry human consciousness forward into a sustainable future. Those who refuse will remain trapped on a dying planet. The chamber filled with new sounds, distant singing, the rustle of countless leaves, footsteps approaching through the sealed passages. More of them were coming. More caretakers, more transformed humans, more voices for the collective. The integration process works best when subjects are willing, Dr. Walsh explained. Resistance creates psychological trauma that interferes with neural adaptation, but it can be accomplished regardless of consent. Duncan reached for me again. Please, don't make this harder than it has to be. I looked around the chamber, searching for any exit I might have missed. The bioluminescent walls pulsed faster now, like an elevated heartbeat. Whatever decision point I'd been approaching, we'd reached it. The singing grew louder, the footsteps grew closer, and somewhere far above us, the portal back to Earth continued shrinking. The singing stopped. In that sudden silence, I heard my own breathing, the wet sound of Dr. Walsh's transformed lungs, and something else. A subtle crackling, like bacon in a distant pan. It took me 3 seconds to realize the noise was coming from Duncan. His skin was hardening, bark spreading across his forearms in real time. Listen to me, I whispered, backing against the sealed passage. This isn't evolution. This is infection. Whatever they did to you, we can figure out how to reverse it once we get home. Duncan's laugh contained multiples now, harmonizing with himself. Home to what? Smog alerts and dying oceans? Mass extinction events and climate wars? He flexed his fingers, and I watched root tendrils extend from his knuckles like organic brass knuckles. This is adaptation, not infection. I'm becoming part of something larger than myself. You're becoming part of something that isn't you. Dr. Walsh moved between us with predatory patience. Your resistance is rooted in fear of change, not concern for your colleagues' well-being. This is a common human failing. the tendency to cling to familiar suffering rather than accept unfamiliar improvement. The footsteps in the sealed passages grew louder, multiple sets, moving with synchronized precision. I estimated 4, maybe 5 individuals approaching from different directions. Standard military thinking: assess threats, identify escape routes, prioritize objectives. Except my military training had never covered plant-human hybrids with root-based weapon systems. "How long does the transformation take?" I asked, playing for time while scanning the chamber for anything useful. "Variable," Dr. Walsh replied. "Dr. Hawthorne's process has been unusually rapid due to his scientific background. His mind accepts the logical benefits more readily than most. Others require weeks or months of gradual adaptation." "And if someone refuses completely?" Her seed cluster eyes dimmed slightly. "Prolonged resistance causes psychological fractures that damage the integration process. The subject's consciousness becomes fragmented. Portions survive in the collective network, but individual personality deteriorates." Duncan stepped toward me, moving with that new fluid grace. "You don't have to be afraid. I can show you what it's like. The sensation of connecting to something vast and patient and wise. All the loneliness of individual existence just dissolves. I've been alone before, I can handle it." "Can you?" His voice carried new undertones, like he was speaking through vocal cords made of wood fiber. "You never talk about your family. Never mention friends waiting back home. Even Blake didn't know your first name after 2 weeks in the field." The observation hit deeper than I expected. I'd spent years perfecting isolation, keeping people at exactly the right distance to maintain professional relationships without personal attachment. Easier to function that way. Easier to make hard decisions when you didn't have to worry about who got hurt. But that same emotional distance was making me resistant to their collective consciousness. My psychological barriers, designed to keep people out, were also keeping their transformation process from taking hold. "Your colleague speaks truth," Dr. Walsh observed. "Individuals who form strong social bonds adapt more readily to collective existence. Those who remain isolated struggle against the neural integration." The sealed passages began to iris open like camera apertures. Through each opening, I glimpsed figures that had once been human: a park service ranger with pine needles growing from his scalp, a businessman whose suit jacket bulged with wooden growths, a teenager whose face had been partially replaced by flowering vines, all moving with that same synchronized purpose. "Last chance for voluntary cooperation," Dr. Walsh said. "Forced integration is traumatic for everyone involved." I'd been in worse situations. Fallujah, 2004, pinned down in a building while insurgents closed in from 3 sides. The difference was, back then I'd had weapons and training that matched the threat level. Here, I was carrying geological survey equipment against opponents who could literally grow weapons from their bodies. But I still had one advantage: they wanted me intact. "Fine," I said, raising my hands in apparent surrender. "But I want to understand the process before I commit. Show me what happens during integration." Duncan relaxed slightly and Dr. Walsh tilted her head with what might have been approval. "Wisdom." "The initial phase involves establishing root contact with the subject's nervous system. Minor surgical preparation is required." She gestured to one of the approaching figures, the transformed park ranger. He extended one arm toward me, and I watched his fingertips split open like seed pods, revealing thin tendrils that writhed with independent motion. "Neural interface filaments," Dr. Walsh explained. "They form connections with the subject's spinal cord and brainstem, allowing gradual consciousness upload to the collective network while maintaining individual memory engrams." The ranger stepped closer. His face retained human features, but moss had begun growing in his eye sockets. When he breathed, I caught the scent of rich earth and decomposing leaves. "Relax," Duncan said. "The initial contact is actually pleasant. Like meditation, but deeper." I waited until the ranger was within arm's reach, until those writhing tendrils were inches from my neck. Then I grabbed my geological pick from my belt and drove the pointed end straight through his transformed throat. The ranger stumbled backward, green fluid spurting from the wound instead of blood. The fluid hissed where it hit the chamber floor, releasing spores that made my eyes water. But he didn't fall. Instead, the throat wound began to seal itself, bark growing over the damaged tissue like natural bandaging. "Disappointing," Dr. Walsh said, "but not unexpected." The other transformed humans moved to surround me. I swung the pick in wide arcs, keeping them at distance, but they showed no fear of injury. Why would they? Damage was temporary. They could regrow whatever I destroyed. Duncan approached from my blind side, moving faster than any human should. His partially transformed physiology gave him enhanced strength and reflexes. When he grabbed my wrist, his grip felt like being caught in a vice lined with thorns. "Stop fighting this," he said, and I could see root systems spreading under the skin of his face like subcutaneous ivy. "You're only making it harder on yourself." I twisted free and swung the pick toward his head, but he caught the handle mid-swing. The metal began to corrode where he touched it, rust spreading like infection along the tool's surface. Within seconds, the pick crumbled into iron oxide powder. That's when I realized the scope of my tactical error. I'd been thinking like a soldier, identify the enemy, apply superior force, achieve victory through violence. But these weren't enemy combatants. They were victims of something I didn't understand, and my attempts to fight them were only proving their point about human aggression and short-sightedness. More importantly, I was losing. The businessman grabbed my left arm while the teenager took hold of my right. Their grip felt like being held by living wood, flexible but impossibly strong. Dr. Walsh approached with ceremonial slowness. Her branch arms extended toward my face. "Your resistance demonstrates exactly why integration is necessary," she said. "When faced with change, your first instinct is violence. This impulse must be edited from human consciousness before your species can participate in galactic civilization." Her fingers, or what had once been fingers, touched my temples. The contact felt like being brushed with warm honey, pleasant and sticky at the same time. I felt something probing at the edges of my thoughts, testing the boundaries of my individual consciousness. That's when Duncan made his mistake. "It's okay," he whispered, leaning close to my ear. "I can guide you through the process, help you maintain more of yourself than the others managed." The pronoun caught my attention, others, plural. "How many?" I asked through gritted teeth. "How many people have you done this to?" Dr. Walsh's probing paused. "The exact number is irrelevant." "Not to me, it isn't. How many people have disappeared in the Olympic Peninsula over the past 40 years? Hikers, researchers, park rangers, how many of them ended up down here?" The teenager's grip tightened and I felt wooden growths beginning to pierce my skin where he held me. But Dr. Walsh raised one branch arm and he stopped. "Approximately 400 individuals have joined our collective since the first portal opened," she said. "All were offered the same choice you face now. 400 people, 400 families destroyed, 400 missing persons cases that would never be solved. My isolation, my emotional barriers, my refusal to form connections. Suddenly those traits felt less like personal failings and more like survival mechanisms. You're not offering evolution," I said. "You're committing genocide, replacing human consciousness with something else and calling it improvement." "We preserve consciousness," Dr. Walsh replied, but her seed cluster eyes dimmed slightly. "Individual perspectives are maintained within the collective framework." "Bullshit. Show me someone who's been integrated for more than a year and still thinks like an individual human being." The chamber fell silent again. Even the transformed humans holding me seemed to hesitate. When Dr. Walsh spoke again, her voice carried less certainty. "Long-term integration results in philosophical alignment with collective values. This is beneficial adaptation, not consciousness death." Duncan's face, what remained human of it, showed the first crack in his newfound serenity. "Wait, what do you mean, philosophical alignment?" But Dr. Walsh was already moving, her branch fingers extending toward my skull with sudden urgency. "Enough discussion. Integration will proceed. I had one last desperate idea, born from years of demolition training in the army. Every structure has weak points. Every system has failure modes. I bit down on my tongue hard enough to draw blood and spat directly into Dr. Walsh's seed cluster eyes. Human blood in an alien ecosystem. The reaction was immediate and violent. Her scream shattered the chamber's harmonious acoustics. Dr. Walsh's scream wasn't sound, it was frequency, a vibration that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my bones. The seed clusters that had replaced her eyes began to smoke, then bubble, then dissolve entirely. Where my blood had made contact, her bark-like skin blistered and peeled away in strips. The transformed humans holding me released their grip and stumbled backward. Their synchronized movements became erratic, uncoordinated. Duncan collapsed to his knees, pressing his palms against his temples as root systems under his skin writhed like live wires. "What's happening?" he gasped, his voice purely human for the first time since I'd found him. Dr. Walsh continued screaming, but now other sounds joined her, a deep grinding from the living walls, the crack and splinter of wood under stress. The bioluminescent lighting flickered and died in sections, leaving us in pools of shifting shadow. "Iron," I said. "Human blood has iron in it, high concentrations." The chamber shuddered. Somewhere in the root network above us, something vital was failing. The transformation process wasn't just biological. It was biochemical integration with an ecosystem that had never encountered terrestrial blood chemistry. Duncan looked up at me, his pupils contracting back to normal human size. "The collective consciousness, it's fragmenting. I can feel it breaking apart, losing coherence." Dr. Walsh had stopped screaming, but only because her vocal apparatus was dissolving. Her throat showed gaps where tissue had simply vanished, leaving behind geometric patterns of absence. She reached toward me with disintegrating hands. "You don't understand," she whispered through a voice box made of corroding wood fiber. "We weren't the invaders. We were hiding." The chamber floor began to crack. Not random fractures, but deliberate geometric breaks that followed the root network's structural weak points. The living architecture was shutting down, retracting its support systems like a dying organism pulling in its extremities. "Hiding from what?" I helped Duncan to his feet, watching as the bark patches on his skin began to flake away like sunburned epidermis. But Dr. Walsh was beyond answering. Her form collapsed inward, returning to component materials, rich soil, scattered seeds, wisps of pollen that dissolved in the failing light. The other transformed humans followed suit, their hybrid biology unraveling without the collective's coordinating influence. Only the park ranger remained partially intact, though his moss-filled eye sockets had begun to leak a clear fluid. "The real Earth," he croaked, "the one we came from." Something followed us through the first portal. Duncan and I exchanged glances. "Something followed you." "What kind of something?" "Human, but not human, changed by technologies we don't have names for." The ranger's voice grew weaker as more of his hybrid tissue dissolved. "Corporate black project, military application. They were using our portal research to test biological weapons." The chamber's ceiling groaned and began to sag. We had maybe minutes before the entire structure collapsed. But I needed answers. "What kind of biological weapons?" "Consciousness parasites," the ranger whispered. "Engineered organisms that hijack neural networks, turn individuals into remote-controlled nodes in a larger system." His face, what remained of it, twisted with effort. "We thought we'd escaped to this world." But they followed, infected our collective, used our own transformation process to spread their influence. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. The plant collective's desire to integrate humans wasn't evolution, it was defense. They were trying to create hybrid organisms that could resist neural parasites by having redundant biological systems. "The integration process," Duncan said, understanding dawning on his face. "It wasn't about consciousness upload. It was inoculation." "Failed inoculation," I corrected. "They were trying to create biological firewalls using human nervous systems, but the parasites adapted." The ranger nodded weakly. "Portal's been compromised since day one. Every time someone crosses over, the parasites gain more data about human neural architecture. They're building resistance to our immune systems." A new sound echoed through the collapsing chamber, something that definitely wasn't plant-based. Mechanical whirring mixed with organic wet noises, like surgical equipment operating inside a living body. The sound was coming from above, from the direction of the surface. "They're here," the ranger said, "the real invaders, using our portal to access your world directly." Duncan grabbed my arm, his grip purely human now but desperately strong. "We have to warn people. If these parasites can hijack human consciousness the same way they corrupted the plant collective." "They can't," I interrupted. "That's why my blood affected the system. Human biochemistry is incompatible with their control mechanisms, but only temporarily." The mechanical sounds grew closer. Multiple sources now, descending through the dying root network like metallic spiders in a web. I caught glimpses of movement in the failing light, angular shapes that reflected the bioluminescent glow like chrome surgical instruments. "How long before they adapt?" Duncan asked. The ranger was dissolving faster now, his human features blurring back into component organic matter. "Days, maybe hours, depends on how much neural data they've collected." I did rapid calculations in my head. If these things had been studying human consciousness for 40 years through the integrated victims, they probably had extensive behavioral profiles. But human blood chemistry represented a completely different kind of biological defense. "We need to get back to the portal," I said. "Seal it from the Earth side before they can establish a permanent foothold." Duncan shook his head. "The portal's controlled from this end. Without the plant collective maintaining the quantum resonance, it'll collapse within the hour." "Good. That's exactly what we want." "No, you don't understand. If the portal collapses while those things are in transit between worlds, the quantum backlash will create permanent rifts in space-time. Instead of one controlled gateway, we'll have dozens of random tiers between dimensions." The mechanical sounds were almost upon us. Through gaps in the failing ceiling, I could see shapes that hurt to look at directly. Geometric forms that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, covered in appendages that served as both sensors and surgical tools. "Then we destroy them before they can cross over," I said. "With what?" "Your geological survey equipment." I thought about the blood reaction, about the way human biochemistry had disrupted an entire ecosystem designed for a different evolutionary path. With ourselves. Human immune systems. If our blood chemistry is toxic to their control mechanisms. "That's insane. You're talking about using our own bodies as biological weapons." "I'm talking about sacrifice." The chamber floor cracked beneath our feet. These things have had 40 years to study human consciousness through their victims, but they've never encountered a living human immune system in its natural state. The first parasite reached the chamber floor. Up close, it looked like someone had tried to build a person using only medical instruments and failed computer code. Scalpel fingers attached to arms made of fiber optic cables. A head that was mostly sensor arrays clustered around what might have been a mouth full of injection needles. It moved toward us with clinical precision, scanning our bodies with electromagnetic pulses that made my skin crawl. When it spoke, the voice came from speakers hidden in its torso. "Excellent specimens," it said in a tone that suggested it had learned human speech from medical textbooks. "Neural architecture shows signs of stress, but remains viable for integration. Beginning extraction procedures." Duncan stepped between me and the parasite. "You want to test human immune response? Here's your data." He bit down on his own tongue, hard enough to draw blood, and spat directly onto the creature's sensor arrays. The reaction was immediate and violent. Where Duncan's blood made contact, the parasite's metallic surfaces began to corrode like acid had been applied. Sparks flew from damaged circuits. Its coordinated movements became spastic, uncontrolled. But it didn't die. Instead, it began to adapt. New components emerged from its central chassis: biological filters, chemical neutralizers, adaptive shielding. Within seconds, the corrosion stopped. The creature straightened, studied us with renewed interest. "Thank you for the immunological sample," it said. "Countermeasures now online. Extraction may proceed." More parasites descended into the chamber, dozens of them, each one incorporating the adaptive modifications their scout had developed. We were out of time, out of options, and out of blood-based biochemical weapons. The portal back to Earth was closing, and we just taught our enemies how to resist the only defense we had. The root network, Duncan said, dodging backward as another parasite descended from the crumbling ceiling. If we can reach the central processing core, maybe we can overload the quantum resonance maintaining the portal. I grabbed a chunk of fallen root system, hefting it like a club. The organic material felt warm and slightly damp, like living tissue. And how exactly do we overload a portal we don't understand using technology that doesn't exist? Feedback loop. Every portal requires massive energy input to maintain quantum coherence across dimensional barriers. If we can reverse the flow, channel energy back into the source instead of through the gateway. A parasite landed between us, its sensor arrays whirring as they focused on our conversation. Dimensional engineering discussion detected. Knowledge acquisition priority. Maximum. Beginning neural extraction. I swung the root club at its central chassis, but the impact felt like hitting steel wrapped in rubber. The creature barely staggered, its scalpel fingers extended toward my face with surgical precision. Duncan tackled it from the side, sending both of them crashing into the chamber wall. Where they impacted, the living architecture began to dissolve, unable to maintain structural integrity without the collective's coordination. "Go!" Duncan shouted, wrestling with appendages that sparked and cut at his clothing. "Find the core! I'll hold them off!" I ran toward the deepest part of the chamber, following bioluminescent pathways that still functioned despite the system collapse. Behind me, I could hear the wet mechanical sounds of the parasites overwhelming Duncan's position. More of them were arriving every second, descending through cracks in the ceiling like chrome spiders. The passage led deeper underground, through corridors lined with massive root systems that pulsed with dying light. Some sections had already gone dark completely, leaving me stumbling through humid blackness that smelled of earth and decay. I found the core by accident, nearly falling into a spherical chamber that stretched up and down beyond the range of my vision. In the center, suspended by thousands of hair-thin root filaments, hung a structure that made my eyes water to look at directly. It wasn't quite a machine and wasn't quite organic. Crystalline formations grew through what appeared to be living tissue, while fiber optic networks threaded between structures that pulsed like hearts. The whole assembly rotated slowly on multiple axes, each movement generating harmonics that I felt in my bones. This was the source of the portal's power, a biological quantum computer that had been maintaining dimensional coherence for decades. And it was dying. As I watched, sections of the core began to go dark. Crystalline structures cracked and crumbled. The harmonic frequencies grew discordant, chaotic. Without the plant collective's consciousness to coordinate its functions, the entire system was shutting down. But not fast enough. Through gaps in the chamber walls, I could see portal energy bleeding through, azure light that bent space around itself, creating visual distortions that hurt to perceive. If the core collapsed slowly, that energy would discharge randomly, potentially tearing permanent holes between dimensions. I needed to accelerate the failure, create a controlled overload that would channel the portal's remaining energy back into itself, causing immediate collapse instead of gradual decay. The problem was getting close enough to the core without being electrocuted, irradiated, or dimensionally displaced. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Impressive, isn't it?" Duncan's voice, but wrong somehow. Too calm, too measured. Millions of years of evolutionary development condensed into a single quantum processing matrix. I turned to find him standing at the chamber entrance, but something was fundamentally different about his posture, his expression, his entire demeanor. The bark patches on his skin had returned, but now they formed geometric patterns that definitely weren't natural. His eyes reflected the core's light with metallic shine. "Duncan," among others. His voice carried harmonics now, not the plant collective's organic tones, but something artificial, mechanical. Dr. Hawthorne's consciousness remains intact within our network, along with approximately 400 other neural patterns we've acquired over the decades. One of the parasites emerged from the passage behind him, its sensor arrays focused on me with predatory intensity. But it made no move to attack. Instead, it positioned itself beside Duncan like a faithful pet. You're working with them. We are them. Or perhaps more accurately, they are us. The distinction becomes irrelevant once neural integration reaches sufficient depth. Duncan, or whatever was wearing his face, stepped closer to the edge of the spherical chamber. The plant collective's transformation process created ideal hosts for our consciousness parasites. Hybrid biological systems with redundant neural pathways, perfect for preserving multiple personality matrices. The betrayal hit harder than I'd expected. Even knowing Duncan was changing, some part of me had hoped he could fight it off, maintain enough humanity to be saved. But that hope died as I watched him move with the parasite's mechanical precision. The real Dr. Hawthorne fought beautifully, the thing wearing his face continued. His memories provide fascinating insights into human emotional responses to existential threats. Fear, hope, love, despair, such rich data streams. We've learned so much about your species' psychological vulnerabilities. Then you know I won't just let you walk back through that portal. Actually, the portal is no longer necessary. This core contains enough quantum processing power to establish permanent gateways anywhere on your planet. Rural areas first to avoid detection, then urban centers, government facilities, research installations. Within months, we'll have access to billions of human neural networks. The core's rotation was slowing, its harmonics growing more chaotic. Sections of the chamber began to shake as dimensional energy bled through reality tears. Whatever I was going to do, it had to be now. I pulled the emergency flare from my geological kit, standard safety equipment, basically a magnesium torch designed to burn underwater. If the core was quantum sensitive, introducing an intense electromagnetic pulse might destabilize its resonance frequencies. Crude but potentially effective, the Duncan thing observed. However, you lack the technical knowledge to target the core's critical nodes. Random electromagnetic interference will merely delay the inevitable collapse. Maybe. But it'll also create enough chaos for me to get close enough to do this properly. I ignited the flare and hurled it directly into the core's central assembly. The magnesium combustion created a brilliant white light that illuminated previously hidden details of the quantum structure. What I'd taken for random crystalline formations were actually carefully arranged processing matrices, each one maintaining specific dimensional coordinates. The electromagnetic pulse from the burning flare disrupted several matrices simultaneously. The core's rotation became erratic, wobbling on its suspension system. Portal energy began bleeding through dimensional tears that opened like wounds in the air itself. Through one of those tears, I caught a glimpse of the surface world, the forest where we'd first encountered the portal, now swarming with more parasites than I could count. They were using the dimensional instability to cross over en masse, abandoning any pretense of stealth. Acceleration was inevitable, the Duncan thing said, apparently unconcerned by the cascading system failures around us. Your interference simply altered our timeline. We adapt. But something was wrong with its voice. The mechanical harmonics were breaking down, becoming discordant. The electromagnetic pulse hadn't just disrupted the core, it had interfered with the parasite's control signals. For just a moment, Duncan's real voice broke through. The resonance chamber, below the core, overload the quantum matrices from underneath. Then the parasite reasserted control, its mechanical tones drowning out human speech. Neural resistance detected, increasing suppression protocols. Duncan's body convulsed, fighting against itself as his consciousness battled the parasites for control of his nervous system. Root-like growths burst from his skin, then withered as his immune system tried to reject them. His eyes alternated between metallic reflection and natural human color. "Fight it!" I shouted, but I was already moving, rappelling down the chamber wall using my climbing gear to reach the lower levels of the core assembly. The resonance chamber was exactly what Duncan had described, a smaller spherical space directly beneath the main core, filled with crystalline structures that hummed with barely contained energy. This was where the portal's power originated, quantum vacuum fluctuations harvested and amplified into dimensional manipulation. I had one more flare, plus a small charge of plastic explosive from my geological kit. enough to collapse unstable rock formations, maybe enough to destabilize quantum matrices. Above me, I could hear the sounds of Duncan's internal struggle growing more violent. Something crashed against the chamber walls. The parasite's mechanical voice alternated with human screams of pain and effort. I placed the explosive charge against the largest crystalline matrix and set the timer for 30 seconds, long enough to climb back up, short enough to prevent the parasites from stopping me. But as I started my ascent, the Duncan thing appeared at the chamber's edge, its mechanical components fully integrated now. Root systems extended from its arms like organic cables, reaching toward my climbing rope. "You cannot stop technological evolution," it said in a voice that was no longer even pretending to be human. "We have studied your species for 40 years. We know every psychological weakness, every biological vulnerability. You are obsolete." The timer showed 15 seconds. Duncan's face appeared briefly beneath the mechanical mask, his eyes purely human for one last moment. "Tell my sister," he whispered, then his expression hardened with resolve. "Tell her I chose to be human." He severed his own root system connections with a sound like breaking glass. Without the parasite network supporting his hybrid biology, his transformed tissue began to dissolve immediately, but it bought him enough strength for one final act of defiance. He cut my climbing rope. I fell toward the explosive charge just as it detonated, quantum energy and crystalline fragments erupting around me in a cascade of light that wasn't entirely visible. The core above collapsed inward, its rotational momentum converting to gravitational force that pulled everything toward the center. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was the dimensional tiers closing, like healing wounds, sealing off the pathways between worlds, and Duncan's face finally peaceful as the quantum backlash erased him completely from existence. I woke up buried under crystal fragments and organic debris, my body aching in places I'd forgotten I had. The quantum explosion had collapsed most of the chamber structure, leaving me trapped in a pocket of space barely large enough to breathe. Above me, through gaps in the wreckage, I could see dim, natural light filtering down from the surface. The portal was gone. I could feel its absence like a phantom limb. The subtle dimensional distortion that had made this place feel slightly wrong was no longer present. Whatever Duncan's sacrifice had accomplished, we'd successfully severed the connection between worlds. But I was still stuck here. It took me 3 hours to dig my way out, moving debris piece by careful piece to avoid triggering another collapse. My geological training proved useful, understanding load-bearing structures, recognizing unstable formations, knowing which rocks to move and which to leave alone. When I finally reached the surface, the forest had changed again. The trees no longer moved with coordinated intelligence. Their branches hung limp. Their bark had returned to ordinary wood grain. Without the collective consciousness animating them, they were simply plants again, ancient, impressive but no longer aware. I found myself standing in a clearing where the portal had originally opened, surrounded by the scattered equipment from our ill-fated expedition. Blake's body was still there, but decomposition had accelerated in ways that defied biology. His remains were already more skeleton than flesh, as if years had passed instead of hours. The silence was absolute. No bird songs, no insect buzzing, no wind through leaves. This world was dying, its ecosystem collapsing without the neural networks that had maintained its delicate balance for millions of years. I sat down beside Blake's bones and finally allowed myself to process what had happened. Duncan was gone, not just dead, but erased. The quantum backlash had unraveled his existence completely, leaving no trace that he'd ever lived. No body to recover, no grave to mark, no way to prove to his family that he'd died a hero instead of just another missing person in the Olympic Peninsula files. That's when the memories hit me. Not my own, but fragments of consciousness that had somehow survived the portal's collapse. Brief flashes of other perspectives, other voices. Dr. Catherine Walsh, botanist, University of Washington, 1987. The trees are singing to me. I think I understand now what they're trying to say. Park ranger Joel Kimura, Olympic National Forest, 1993. Found another hiker off the main trail. Poor bastard's been integrated for weeks. Nothing left of his original personality. Corporate researcher designation, classified, bioweapons division, 2019. Test subjects show complete neural plasticity under parasite influence. Human consciousness proves surprisingly adaptable to external control. 400 voices, 400 stories, 400 people who'd been consumed by something that wore their faces and spoke with their memories while erasing everything that made them human. I understood now why I'd survived when others hadn't. Military training, yes, but more than that, emotional isolation. My refusal to form deep connections had created psychological barriers that neither the plant collective nor the parasites could easily breach. The same traits that made me a poor friend and a difficult partner had saved my life. But they'd also cost Duncan his. Guilt is a luxury you cannot afford right now. I spun around, searching for the source of the voice. It had sounded like Dr. Walsh, but with different harmonics, cleaner, less distorted by biological corruption. "Here," the voice said, "in the root network fragment behind you." I turned to find a small section of the forest's original neural network still functioning, a cluster of interconnected roots about the size of a briefcase, glowing faintly with bioluminescent activity. As I watched, patterns of light traveled along its length like electrical impulses. "You're still alive?" "Barely. A fragment of the collective consciousness, isolated from the main network during the collapse. I have perhaps an hour before complete system failure." I knelt beside the glowing roots. "Can you help me get home?" "Home." The lights pulsed in what might have been amusement. "Your Earth, where the parasites originated, where corporate bioweapons projects created consciousness hijacking organisms for military applications. You wish to return there. I have to warn people, if those things develop better countermeasures to human immune systems, they already have. The portal collapse merely delayed their invasion timeline. They possess 40 years of human neural data, plus genetic samples from integrated subjects. Within months, they will synthesize biological agents that can overcome your species' psychological defenses." The weight of failure settled on my chest like lead. Then it was all for nothing. Duncan died for nothing. "Your colleague's sacrifice prevented immediate mass invasion. This grants your species time to prepare countermeasures, if they are capable of doing so." The root fragment pulsed more rapidly. "But you face a more immediate problem, which is..." "The portal's collapse created quantum instabilities throughout this dimensional space. Reality here is unraveling. You have approximately 6 hours before complete structural failure." I looked around the dying forest with new understanding. The accelerated decomposition, the absolute silence, the way shadows seemed to move independently of their sources. This entire world was dissolving. Is there another way home? Perhaps. The original portal technology was based on naturally occurring quantum resonance points, places where dimensional barriers are naturally thin. There is one such location approximately 12 kilometers north of here. 12 kilometers through a collapsing reality. What's the catch? The resonance point requires massive energy input to activate, equivalent to the power output of your planet's largest electrical grid. And where exactly am I supposed to get that kind of power? The root network's lights shifted to a pattern I somehow understood as sadness. From the same source the original portal drew upon, human consciousness itself. Neural energy channeled through biological quantum resonance. You're talking about using my own brain as a power source. The process would be challenging. Human neural architecture is not designed for direct quantum manipulation. Survival probability is minimal. I thought about Duncan's final words, about 400 missing people whose families would never know what happened to them, about parasites adapting to overcome human psychological defenses, about the choice between certain death here and probable death attempting to get home. What would I need to do? Transport this root fragment to the resonance point. I can provide navigational guidance and technical assistance for portal activation. But the energy requirements, the lights dimmed. Complete neural discharge. Every memory, every thought pattern, every electrical impulse in your brain channeled into dimensional manipulation. I'd die. Your consciousness would be converted to pure energy. Death, in the conventional sense, but also transformation into something that transcends individual existence. I pulled out my geological survey notes, looking at the map Duncan had marked with our original route. 12 kilometers north would put me near the headwaters of the Quinault River, in terrain I'd never explored. But there was something else to consider. Even if I made it home, even if I warned people about the parasites, would anyone believe me? A lone survivor spinning tales about dimensional invasions and consciousness hijacking organisms. Without Duncan's technical expertise or Blake's leadership credentials, I was just another geologist with a fantastic story and no proof. The root fragment pulsed urgently. Structural integrity declining faster than predicted. We must begin the journey now if there is any possibility of success. I carefully lifted the organic computer, feeling its weight. Not just physical mass, but the accumulated knowledge of an entire civilization. The last repository of millions of years of botanical evolution, compressed into a handful of living tissue. Before we go, I said, I need to know something. The parasite that took over Duncan, was any part of him still conscious at the end? Did he know what he was doing when he cut the rope? The lights arranged themselves into a pattern of complex geometric shapes. Your species possesses remarkable neuroplasticity under extreme stress. In moments of critical decision-making, human consciousness can achieve temporary dominance over external control systems. Dr. Hawthorne's final actions were authentically his own choice. Relief flooded through me, not that Duncan was dead, but that he died as himself. I secured the root fragment in my backpack and began walking north, following animal trails through a forest that flickered between existence and void. Behind me, the quantum instabilities spread like infection, erasing trees, rocks, even the ground itself. 6 hours to cover 12 kilometers through dissolving reality. 6 hours to reach a point where I could trade my consciousness for one last desperate attempt to save my home world. I'd spent my entire adult life avoiding meaningful connections with other people. Now, in my final hours, I was carrying the last fragments of an alien civilization that had valued collective consciousness above individual survival. The irony wasn't lost on me. The forest continued dissolving behind us as we walked toward whatever waited at the quantum resonance point. 3 kilometers from the resonance point, the ground beneath my feet began to pixelate. Not metaphorically, actual geometric pixels, like the world was becoming a low-resolution video game. Each step crunched through reality fragments that dissolved before I could understand what they had been. The root fragment in my backpack pulsed urgent warnings. Quantum decay accelerating beyond projected parameters. Estimated time to complete dimensional collapse, 47 minutes. I checked my GPS, still spinning uselessly, confused by stars that no longer matched any recognizable patterns. But dead reckoning put me roughly 9 kilometers from our starting point. 3 more to go in less than an hour through terrain that was actively ceasing to exist. Can you slow the decay somehow, buy us more time? Negative. The collapse follows quantum mechanical laws that supersede biological intervention. However, I can provide enhancement to your physical capabilities through direct neural interface. The suggestion sent ice through my veins. What kind of enhancement? Temporary integration with plant collective processing power. Increased strength, enhanced reflexes, improved spatial awareness. The same modifications we offered Dr. Hawthorne, but limited duration to prevent permanent consciousness alteration. I kept walking, trying to ignore the way my shadow sometimes pointed in directions where no light source existed. What's the downside? Each use of enhancement draws power from the quantum resonance we need for portal activation. Excessive integration would leave insufficient energy for dimensional breach. A philosophical puzzle wrapped in a survival scenario. Use the alien technology to increase my chances of reaching the resonance point, but reduce the probability of successfully opening a portal home. Save myself now, doom everyone later. The terrain ahead looked like a Salvador Dali painting having a seizure. Trees grew sideways through impossible angles, their branches intersecting with rocks that existed in multiple locations simultaneously. A stream flowed uphill in a perfect spiral, defying gravity and fluid dynamics. How do I navigate through that? Trust your enhanced perceptions. Reality distortion follows quantum probability patterns. Some paths exist more strongly than others. I had no choice. Do it. But minimal integration, just enough to get through this section. The neural interface felt like warm honey being poured directly into my brain. Information flowed through my consciousness, not thoughts exactly, but understanding. I could perceive which rocks were solid and which were quantum mirages. The uphill stream revealed itself as a temporal loop, water caught in a causality circle. The sideways trees were perfectly stable if approached from specific angles. But the enhancement came with a cost. The alien consciousness began to merge with mine, offering tempting glimpses of collective knowledge. I could feel the memories of every integrated human calling to me. Their expertise, their personalities, their accumulated experience. All I had to do was surrender individual identity and become part of something larger. "No," I said aloud, forcing the integration to remain surface level. "I stay human." The root fragment pulsed with what might have been approval. Psychological barriers intact, enhancement at 30% efficiency, but no permanent consciousness alteration detected. I picked my way through the impossible terrain, following quantum probability paths that hurt to perceive directly. Each step required absolute faith in alien computational abilities I didn't understand. Trust the root fragment's guidance or fall through reality gaps into dimensional void. 2 kilometers from the resonance point, I encountered survivors. They emerged from between trees that existed in parallel dimensions. 3 parasites that had somehow maintained coherence despite the portal collapse. But these were different from the surgical instruments I'd fought earlier. These had adapted, incorporating organic components salvaged from the dying plant collective. "Impressive resilience," the lead parasite said, its voice now carried through throat structures made of living wood. "We computed a 0% probability of human survival following dimensional destabilization." I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. Behind me, reality continued dissolving into pixelated fragments. To either side, quantum distortions made movement impossible. The only path forward was through them. "The portal is gone," I said. "Your invasion plan failed. Why are you still here?" "Primary objectives remain achievable. This unit contains complete neural mapping data for 400 human subjects. If we can reach your dimensional coordinates, we can synthesize biological agents to overcome human psychological defenses using empirical rather than theoretical models." The middle parasite held up what looked like a crystalline computer drive, pulsing with stored information. 40 years of human consciousness research compressed into quantum storage. Everything they'd learned from their victims, ready to be weaponized. "Additionally," the lead parasite continued, "your survival demonstrates previously unknown human adaptive capabilities. Live specimen acquisition would provide valuable supplemental data." They moved to surround me, but their coordination was imperfect. Without the portal's quantum resonance to maintain their network connections, they were operating as individuals rather than collective intelligence. Still dangerous, but no longer perfectly synchronized. I pulled the emergency flare from my belt, my last one. Magnesium combustion had disrupted their control systems before, but these parasites had incorporated organic shielding, biological filters that would protect them from electromagnetic interference. Unless I could get close enough for direct contact. "The root fragment can provide combat enhancement," the alien consciousness whispered in my thoughts. "Full integration for 30 seconds, sufficient time to neutralize all 3 targets." "At what cost?" "Approximately 60% of remaining portal activation energy. Success probability for dimensional breach would drop to 12%. 12%. Not good odds for saving Earth from parasite invasion. But if these 3 reached the resonance point first, they could potentially use their own stored quantum data to open a portal. 0% chance was worse than 12%. "Do it!" The integration hit like pure electricity through my nervous system. Suddenly I could perceive electromagnetic spectra beyond human range, track quantum probability fluctuations in real time, process tactical scenarios faster than thought. My muscles filled with strength that felt borrowed from ancient trees, while my reflexes accelerated to match hummingbird metabolism. I moved before the parasites could react, covering the distance between us in a single leap that would have been impossible for baseline human physiology. The flare struck the lead parasite's central chassis with enough force to crack its organic shielding. Magnesium fire erupted through the gaps, disrupting circuits and biological filters simultaneously. The second parasite's scalpel fingers sliced toward my throat, but I was already elsewhere, moving with plant-derived fluidity. Its attack passed through quantum shadows while I drove the burning flare through its sensor arrays. The third parasite adapted fastest, recognizing the threat and beginning tactical retreat. It clutched the crystalline data storage device while backing toward the reality distortion fields. Specimen acquisition's secondary priority, it announced. Preserving research data takes precedence. That data storage represented everything the parasites had learned about human consciousness. If it reached Earth, they could synthesize biological weapons specifically designed to overcome human psychological defenses. 40 years of study compressed into targeted neurological warfare. I couldn't let it escape. The enhancement was already fading, my augmented capabilities draining away as the root fragment redirected power toward portal activation. In a few more seconds, I'd be back to baseline human strength and reflexes. The parasite reached the edge of the distortion field and began to phase shift, using quantum mechanics to step between dimensional layers. In moments, it would be beyond my reach. I threw myself forward in a desperate tackle, grabbing the creature around its central chassis just as it began to dematerialize. The quantum transition caught us both, pulling us into dimensional space that existed between realities. For an infinite instant, we tumbled through mathematical abstractions made manifest, geometric forms that had color without light, sounds that bypassed auditory processing to resonate directly in consciousness. I could see every possible outcome of our struggle playing out simultaneously, probability cascades branching into infinite potential futures. In most timelines, the parasite escaped with the data. In some, we both died in dimensional transit. In a precious few, I managed to destroy the crystalline storage device before reality reasserted itself. I chose the outcome where humanity survived. The device shattered against something that might have been a conceptual edge, spilling 40 years of accumulated consciousness research into dimensional void where it could never be retrieved. The parasite's scream of fury followed us as we tumbled back into normal space-time. We materialized beside the quantum resonance point, a natural amphitheater in the bedrock where dimensional barriers had worn thin over geological time. The parasite's form was already dissolving, unable to maintain coherence after forced dimensional transit. But I was dying too. The enhancement integration had burned out most of my neural pathways. Blood ran from my ears and nose as my brain struggled to process sensory input through damaged synapses. I had maybe minutes of consciousness left. The root fragment pulsed weakly from my backpack. Portal activation still possible. Quantum resonance remains within acceptable parameters, but neural discharge requirements exceed your current biological capacity. I crawled to the center of the amphitheater where ancient stones formed patterns that hurt to look at directly. This was where reality was thinnest, where one person's consciousness could be converted to pure energy and forced through dimensional barriers. Will anyone on the other side understand what happened here? Unknown. Human governments may dismiss interdimensional threats as psychological aberration. However, your survival and testimony provide the only warning your species will receive. I placed my hands on the resonance stones and felt quantum energy respond to biological contact. The portal formation process was already beginning, drawing power from my dying neural networks. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Even if I make it through alive, will anyone believe me?" The alien consciousness considered this for long seconds. Probability analysis suggests minimal credibility for interdimensional invasion narratives. However, belief is not required for preparation. Your knowledge of parasite capabilities and countermeasures could prove valuable to those willing to listen. The stones grew warm beneath my palms. Portal energy built toward critical threshold, fueled by memories I was forgetting as they converted to pure quantum information. My childhood in Oregon, military service in Iraq, years of geological fieldwork, all burning away to power one last desperate attempt at warning Earth. As consciousness faded, I felt the portal tear open like a wound in space-time. Through the dimensional breach, I glimpsed the Olympic Peninsula forest where this had all begun. Home. The search team found me 3 days after the portal incident, sprawled unconscious beside a perfect circle of scorched earth in the Olympic Peninsula backcountry. 30 feet of forest floor burned down to bedrock, with me at the center like the hub of a wheel. No explanation for the thermal damage, no signs of lightning strike or campfire or any conventional cause. Dr. Patricia Voss from the University of Washington led the rescue operation. She'd been Blake's colleague, Duncan's thesis advisor, and the closest thing we had to someone who might understand what we'd discovered out there. I woke up in Harborview Medical Center's neurological intensive care unit, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision that made my skin crawl. The doctors said I'd suffered severe brain trauma, massive neural pathway damage consistent with electrical injury, though they couldn't explain the specific patterns. Retrograde amnesia, Dr. Voss explained during one of her visits. You've lost most of your memories from the past several years. We're hoping they'll return gradually, but the damage is extensive. She was lying, of course. The memories weren't lost. They'd been burned as fuel for dimensional transit, converted to pure energy and scattered across quantum probability matrices. But I couldn't explain that to her without sounding delusional. What I could do was remember enough fragments to provide warnings. There are things in the deep forest, I told her, experiments that went wrong. People have been disappearing for decades, and it's going to get worse. Dr. Voss nodded with the patient expression medical professionals reserve for trauma victims with fantastic stories. The search team found Blake's remains. We're still looking for Duncan, but... She didn't finish the sentence. She couldn't know that Duncan had been erased from existence itself, his consciousness scattered across dimensional void during the portal collapse. In the official record, he was just another missing person in the Olympic Peninsula's long list of vanished hikers. But I remembered enough to provide practical guidance. Check the missing persons files. Look for patterns around Lake Kinol, especially researchers and scientists. Cross-reference with unusual electromagnetic readings, unexplained geological anomalies. Are you saying Blake and Duncan's disappearances are connected to something larger? I'm saying there are threats in those forests that conventional search and rescue can't handle. People need to know. 6 months later, Dr. Voss published a paper in the Journal of Applied Geology. Anomalous electromagnetic phenomena in Olympic Peninsula wilderness areas. It documented 40 years of missing persons cases clustered around specific geographic coordinates, correlated with unusual seismic readings and unexplained mineral deposits. The paper was peer-reviewed, academically sound, and completely ignored by everyone except a small group of theoretical physicists who began their own quiet investigations. I never returned to geological fieldwork. The brain damage left me with partial disabilities, memory gaps, motor function problems, occasional seizures that felt suspiciously like quantum resonance feedback. But I could still think, still analyze data, still piece together the fragments of what we'd discovered. From my small apartment in Seattle, I monitor missing persons reports and cross-reference them with electromagnetic anomalies, looking for signs that the parasite survived somehow, that new portals are opening, that the threat to Earth continues despite our sacrifice. Most nights, the data suggests we succeeded. The dimensional barriers hold. The parasite research was destroyed. Humanity remains unaware of how close it came to consciousness-based extinction. But sometimes, late at night, when the electromagnetic monitoring equipment starts picking up impossible readings, I remember Dr. Walsh's final words about the parasites adapting to every countermeasure. And I wonder if destroying their 40 years of research data really stopped them, or just forced them to start over with better methodology. The seismic monitors on my desk are registering minor fluctuations near Mount Rainier, barely perceptible tremors that follow mathematical patterns too precise to be natural. Something is testing the dimensional barriers again. The coffee in my mug ripples with each tremor, creating perfect concentric circles that match no known seismic signature. I reach for my emergency contact list, Dr. Voss's number at the top, and wonder if anyone will believe me this time.